Hello, and thank you for joining us for another edition of the Rhode Island Small Business Coalition Small Business Live Forum. I'm David Dadakian. I'm a small business owner here in Rhode Island. I own Eat Drink Rhode Island, and we're very happy to have you watching the show again today. As always, you can check out rismallbusiness.org for membership options with the Small Business Coalition. We're creating a whole new website, a whole new portal, a lot of great things. But if you jump on now, you'll see all that information coming to you. rismallbusiness.org, and as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, the RI Small Business Coalition. We're very happy today to have as our guest Representative David Cicilline, and Representative, it's great to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you having me.
So why don't we dive right into the questions?
I'm sorry. I just want to quickly say thank you, of course,
Sure.
to you and to Chris Parisi and the entire Rhode Island Small Business Coalition for your incredible leadership and your great advocacy and for the work that you have done, particularly through this public health crisis. This has been obviously a really challenging time for our state, for our country, and particularly hard for small businesses, which in Rhode Island, of course, are the backbone of Rhode Island's economy. And so I also want to say thank you to all the small business owners, their employees, their families, because so many of these are family-owned businesses, and just say thank you for all that you've done to get through this very difficult period and to help Rhode Islanders keep safe, very often at a substantial cost to your own businesses and your own bottom lines. And I think, what we have to recognize during this pandemic is that small businesses have had to endure really unimaginable stress. And our delegation has worked hard to try to do all that we can to extend a lifeline to small businesses during the pandemic. And as we recover, to be sure that we're making the right investments to help them get through this. And we did that in the American Rescue Plan. We did it in the CARES Act before that. And we're about to do that with some critical infrastructure investments. And, small businesses are very much on the forefront of my mind, and I know of our whole delegations. So I really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you directly, both your thoughts, your opinions, answer your questions, but just again, to give me an opportunity to say thank you for everything that you've done through a really, really hard time.
Well, on behalf of all of us at the coalition, you're welcome, and thank you. Thank you very much for those thoughts. I want to remind everyone watching on Facebook, if you have questions for the Congressman, you want to put them into the Facebook Live chat. We'll get to those later on after we get through my questions. And actually, speaking of Facebook, Congressman, I want to say, both your parents celebrated their birthday on Saturday?
Yeah, they have the same birthday, a year apart, but the same day, August 7th.
Wow, well, a belated happy birthday to them. That's fantastic. It was very nice to see them.
2 years apart, my mother would be very mad. My mother's 81, my father's 83.
Yeah, get that right. I understand. All right, so we'll dive into these questions. And as you might imagine, a lot of the questions from our members in the coalition revolve around the SBA and the SBA programs. And frankly, there's been a lot of good. Let's not forget that. I think I should preface all this by saying, PPP was fantastic for a lot of people. There's been a lot of things that worked. But as happens, oftentimes with questions, these types of programs, it's about the downside of the things that haven't worked. And one of the things is that a lot of the Rhode Island businesses that have applied for some of these programs have been denied, and they feel, what is Congress's role in oversight of the SBA? And there's appropriations and funding and things of that nature. How do you see that working, and why do you think so many Rhode Island businesses are getting denied?
Well, I think it really depends on the programs that you're speaking about, but the SBA is supervised by the Small Business Committee in the Congress. I served on the Small Business Committee in my first term, actually. But I think it's important to recognize that the SBA was asked and required to do kind of a massive set of programs to respond to the pandemic. And they, I think, sent out historic amounts of money that Congress approved in a number of different ways. And I think, we have a responsibility to make sure that that happens the way we intend it to happen. I've been a part of a number of communications to the SBA director on a number of issues. The Small Business Committee will have oversight broadly. But in addition to that, the Speaker created a select committee to really oversee and ensure full accountability for all the money that's being spent in connection with this pandemic, both through the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. These are historic amounts of money that are going out, both to help working families and help small businesses. We have a responsibility to make sure that it is done properly and everyone is held accountable. So there's a select committee chaired by Jim Clyburn, the House Whip, that is doing that work as well.
And are you or Representative Langeman on that committee, or you remain in touch with members there?
Yes, I remain in touch with members of the select committee. We all have regular contact with our SBA regional director, and obviously hear from small businesses. I think a number of the programs, some of them had kind of a rough start, like the shuttered venue program. Some of them just simply didn't have enough money, although we appropriated initially, I think it was $28 billion for the restaurant fund, or 28.6. There's a much greater need. I've introduced, along with a number of colleagues, a Restaurant Revitalization Replenishment Act that would add another $60 billion to that fund. So I think, again, many of these programs will need additional resources. A lot of that will depend on whether there's sufficient support in the Congress to pass those. And I think that will be determined in large part by kind of the direction of the pandemic. We're now facing another surge of the Delta variant. And I think, there's going to have to be some recognition that small businesses are likely to be affected again. And we have to just be prepared to provide additional support.
So, using restaurant revitalization as an example, I mean, that seems relatively easy because they don't have to create a new program. The application and all that already exists. What do you think is the possibility of that getting refunded? Because not refunded, refunded. Because as you said, things may be taking a downturn for large parts of the country. Thankfully, we're in pretty good shape up here, but it's not always the case.
So, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund Replenishment Act would provide an additional $60 billion. And that is expected to cover all of the existing applications and also provide some additional outreach to particularly difficult to reach communities. And so that is pending. I think there's support for it in the House. And again, we'll have to make sure we have the votes before it comes to the floor. I think, we were successful in terms of the money that went out from Rhode Island, but we had many businesses that didn't get the funding, and not because they weren't qualified, but because there just wasn't enough money. And, we included in the American Rescue Plan some additional funding for shuttered venues. That program provided a $16.25 billion. But again, there were a number of very qualified restaurants that just put in their applications, but there just wasn't enough money. So I'm hoping we'll replenish that, and that we'll be able to help small businesses particularly in the restaurant business here in Rhode Island, that we know is such a big part of the Rhode Island economy. And I'm just looking for the number. I think that we had in Rhode Island 440 Restaurant Revitalization Fund awards that totaled about $106 million. And there, as of August 2nd, over 40 shuttered venue operating grant awards were made in the amount totaling $12.7 million. And in addition to that, it's important to remember that the state and the cities and towns got what is referred to as coronavirus relief funds.
Right.
Those funds are also eligible to be used to support small businesses, including restaurants. So every city and town, and the state has $1.25 billion of that, have the ability to provide additional support to small businesses.
Right. Yeah. The Small Business Coalition has been talking to a lot of mayors and town councils about those funds in the different municipalities. And, if there are members out there watching this, want to be involved in talking to municipalities on behalf of small businesses, please reach out. We'd love to have more people talking about that and getting funds into small businesses and other parts.
That's a really important point. We provided tremendous flexibility in the coronavirus relief fund. And we also insisted that the money go directly to local communities because as a former mayor, I understood how important it was that cities and towns have these resources. And so it's a real opportunity for the small business community to make your case, not just to the state, the Department of Commerce and the governor's office, but also to local cities and towns who have resources to say small businesses need additional help. There ought to be help available at the local level, at the state level, and obviously through the SBA at the federal level.
Yeah. And I interviewed Mayors Grebian and Alorza recently, and we've got Mayor Policina and Mayor Hopkins coming up soon. So keep those questions coming in from members out there. Let's talk about shuttered venues for a second. I've got a few questions on that. I should point out, I interviewed the SBA director here, Mark Hayward, a few months ago, and the Rhode Island office has been really fantastic. But at a certain point, the district offices can only do so much, and a lot of us get pushed over to phone numbers at the federal level. And that's where, unfortunately, the I don't want to say bureaucracy, but the stereotypical problems with government sometimes crop up. And I'm going to use this shuttered venues grant as an example because I have a personal story about it. So I'm an event producer. I made sure, I all the eligibilities on the form. I filled out the form. It was accepted. And last week I got an email saying I was denied, but that I could appeal. So I went to the form to see what, did I miss a box? Did I put in the wrong number somewhere? And unfortunately, the denial does not tell me in any way, shape, or form why I was denied, but I have to write a letter saying why I should appeal. So I tried reaching out to the local office, and Joan was very nice and helpful, but she said, we don't have any access to shuttered venue. Can you call the 800 number and talk to someone in DC, which I did. And they don't have the information on why I was denied either. So it's kind of this, this weird, circular trash can, essentially, and all I can do now is send back another letter saying, I hit all these points, please give me this grant. And I'm not alone in this. I've had many members of the event community here in Rhode Island tell me the same or similar stories. One of our members, his application was denied due to lack of activity. When he finally got a hold of someone in DC to say, what is the lack of activity? I filled everything out. I hit the deadline and everything. He was told that because the IRS didn't respond to his 4506T in time, that was the lack of activity, which clearly he has no control over. So, when things like that happen, we hear these stories, and obviously I hope these are small slice of stories and not the large group, because as you point out, many people do receive grants. How do you react? What do you think you can do as a congressperson with this oversight of the SBA, and can you give them more funds? What's the possibilities there?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First of all, anyone who's been denied, who doesn't have a satisfactory answer as to why, they should reach out to my office. We can assist in working that with the SBA. That's why we're there. I think Annie Pease from my office is on this call, and she'll put her number or email in the chat and the phone number of my office, which is 729-5600. But reach out to us. We're happy to try to get those answers for you. I think, one of the things, the SVOG program was really from the very beginning plagued with some pretty serious problems. Again, this is part of an effort to get money out really fast, as quickly as possible, and at the same time want to be sure that it's being used and it's going out appropriately. So, there has to be a sort of balance. This is an enormous amount of taxpayer money, and it's very often grants. So we're basically giving this money to businesses, and we have to be sure that we're doing it properly and that people who actually qualify get it, et cetera. So I think there's some of that, but the SVGO program was particularly problematic from the very launch. And in fact, the application portal crashed on April 8th, which created some additional problems. Then there was some litigation because there was a provision that provided some pre-filing benefit or pre-filing priorities for veteran-owned, women-owned, minority-owned businesses that was challenged and halted. So that, I think, complicated some of it. But, we originally appropriated $16.25 billion to this program, and only a very small amount was distributed as of July, I think $3 billion. So there's a lot more money there. And, again, we've had some success here in Rhode Island, but if you think you're an eligible venue and you either were denied or need some help in filing your application, just be in touch with my office and we're happy to help you. We'll continue to provide oversight broadly, but for individual constituents that have had a small business that has applied for any of the help that's available and you've had an unsuccessful effort, reach out to us. If we can fix it or we can cause them to reconsider, we will. If not, we can hopefully explain why you were denied. But it also gives me information about what programs need to be replenished. And so that information is really useful.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. As you can see, our producers put the number on the screen there. So if you're watching this, you can view this. And if you're not sure which representative is yours, because obviously there are two here on Island, and the line, especially through Providence, gets a little wavy and curvy. You can search that on the Secretary of State website.
And if you can also put David Annie Pease's email, if it's easier for people, it's Annie ANIE.Pease PEASE. Oh, and her email she's already put up there. Never mind.
All right, thank you, Annie. We appreciate that. All right, so that's SVOG. How about the idle increase? That a lot of folks were denied for that. A lot of it was unfortunately due to low income areas were allowed before others. It just got complicated again, and for small businesses who just needed the money right away, complicated. Unfortunately, while you're right. These things are big, massive programs, and I'm not going to debate that. It is an issue to roll these things out quickly sometimes because they are so massive. But what do you see with EIDL and how that program's going?
Yeah, I mean, we wrote, a number of us wrote to the SBA administrator back in August to really urge that the processing of EIDL loans be given a top priority. And, caseworkers in my office have had some difficulty in getting answers from the SBA about the status of those applications. We provided additional support for the EIDL loans, but I think that's another area. Again, these are grants where we are going to have to provide some additional funding. These are particularly important to very small businesses. And again, if someone has made an application and has not received funding and you think you are entitled to it, please reach out to us and we're happy to try to track it down.
Thank you. We talked about the restaurant revitalization. And then a big overarching question a lot of members are asking, especially seeing as how there may be this spike. Do you see any more programs coming down the line or extensions of programs like hopefully the revitalization refunding or replenishment as it is, or perhaps the UI self-employed program, anything like that maybe being extended?
Yes. I mean, I think, again, this will really be determined in large part by whether my colleagues are hearing from small businesses in their own districts, in their own states about what their needs are. And I think very much kind of the trajectory of the pandemic and of the virus. So, I think what we're all bracing for is if there is in fact a significant surge because of the Delta variant or another variant, we may have to provide some additional support in all these programs. And again, it's always a battle, in the American Rescue Plan, sadly, we didn't get a single Republican vote for all the help for working families, for small businesses. So, we may have to do some of this on our own without bipartisan support, but the rules in the Senate are different. But again, I think we all have to recognize that, small businesses are the employers in our districts. They provide, really important goods and services in the communities we represent. And we need them to get through this kind of once in a generation pandemic. When people say this is a lot of money, this is really extraordinary. It is, but it's extraordinary because the moment requires it. When we passed the American Rescue Plan, I think it really recognized both the public health crisis and the economic devastation that COVID-19 had caused. And we have to be sure that we're positioning small businesses to not only survive, but prosper on the other side of this so that we have an economy when we finally get through this pandemic. And that may require additional resources. I think it very likely will. I'm a strong supporter of that, and that's why I've co-sponsored the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and a number of other bills to replenish some of these programs. We know they're working. We've heard from a lot of businesses that but for them, they'd close, and so we know the need is great, and we have to be prepared to do more.
Thank you. Yes, it is one of those odd difficulties sometimes here in Rhode Island when something comes up that we want our all of our congressional delegation to vote on, but you're already in agreement with us. So it's kind of like, well, we can complain, but they're already doing with the work that we hope that they're doing. So thank you for trying to replenish these funds. It is vital to these small businesses. So looking at that, the CARES Act, ARPA, all the programs that the overarching, what do you feel were some of the successes or failures for small businesses, and what are we learning from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the PPP program, I think, was very successful for many businesses in Rhode Island. It provided a real lifeline. We had, I'm just trying to make sure I have the right number here, but we had a significant amount of support that came through the PPP program. The EIDL loan and grant program was also very successful. I think we need more money there. The shuttered venues, I think, is really critical to a state that relies so much on arts and culture and such a big part of our economy. We've also provided significant support to working families in both survival checks, that is the stimulus checks that people have spoken about, obviously supplemental insurance benefits, child care tax credits, things that will put more money in the pockets of working people that they then can use to support restaurants and hospitality in their communities. So getting that money out quickly, and then significant support to local governments and the state government. I mean, that's something I fought really hard for, so that the people on the front lines of this pandemic, the police officers and firefighters and healthcare workers, wouldn't face unemployment as a result of state and local governments facing depleted revenue, and making sure that we provided support to cities and towns and the state and gave them maximum flexibility to use it in the way that was most beneficial to the communities they represent, I think was really, really critical and very, very important.
Yeah. I think it's important to point out that the majority of those funds that go back to people, be it the child tax credit or just the stimulus checks, or I don't know if you want to call it stimulus or not, but
we call them survival checks.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No,
that's what it was.
I agree. But I was going to say that money does go back into the local economy. Yeah, I mean, sure, people are going to have to shop at, some of the bigger chains occasionally to get some of the goods that they need. But mostly people at that income level making that kind of money and getting those checks because they're at that lower income level, spend it back in the community. And I think that's vital. And so thank you for that.
Yeah. And again, as you point out, people who are benefiting from that support are really just trying to survive. And that money gets spent most often in the communities in which they live to support small businesses. So it's really an economic stimulus to the local and state economy, as well as essential for the family's survival. And particularly in the American Rescue Plan, we included a child care tax credit that lifted half of the children in America living in poverty out of poverty. So it did a lot of real good.
Yeah, it almost, when you see programs like that happening, I don't want to go too far down this path, but you almost wonder why they're not permanent programs. So to some extent, maybe not the same amounts, but some level.
We're trying to make them permanent, and I know that it's a big priority of our caucus.
All right. Well, thank you. We did have one question from Facebook regarding the ARPA grants going to the municipalities. Do you know, and this may, be part of the individual rules, but are municipalities allowed to not give grants if a small business has received federal funding from other programs, PPP or EIDL or whatever?
I don't think there is any disqualifying provision that says if a state or a city or town has coronavirus relief funds and they decide to use that for small business grants, I don't think there's any provision that says if they've received a grant through SBA or some other federal program, they're disqualified. Annie will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there is. We try to give as much flexibility as possible to the local communities. So depending on what your local community's needs are, some people might say, we don't want to provide any additional support to small business. We think that's a bad idea. Or they may say, look, we want to provide a zero interest loan program to small businesses. Or others that are particularly hard hit, or sectors that are particularly hard hit, they may say, we want to do a grant program, even though there's a grant program at the federal level and the state level. So I met with each of the mayors of the communities that I represent to go through the money that was coming to that city or town. And I encourage them to pay attention to the small business community and recognize that that was an eligible use for the coronavirus relief funds. And obviously the judgment about how much of it should be used for that purpose is up to the local community, but it's an eligible use. And then I encourage small businesses to make sure they were reaching out, which I know you, David, and others in the organization have done already.
Oh, well, thank you. That's good to hear. You mentioned, it's up to the municipalities, and obviously there's a lot of other things in a town that need to be taken care of besides small businesses. As much as we are focused on small business here, infrastructure being one of them. So we've got this large infrastructure package coming. I know, it's in the Senate now, so there may be changes. What can Rhode Island expect from this package? And since we're on the topic, and our former governor is Commerce Secretary, are you in touch with her at all? Do you have communications? Is she still, a vibrant part of Rhode Island as she's helping the rest of the country?
Yes, I'm in regular contact with Secretary Raimondo, and although she has responsibility now for the whole country, I think it is fair to say she continues to pay special attention to her home state, and I'm proud of that. So this is a really important infrastructure framework that the Senate is passing. It includes about $550 billion in new federal spending on roads, bridges, water infrastructure, resilience, internet, and much more. That will be followed by this major jobs plan that is part of the president's Build Back Better agenda that will happen through reconciliation. And that infrastructure bill, coupled with the American Jobs Plan, will create about 2 million jobs. Rhode Island will get from the infrastructure bill alone about $2 billion. And that's a significant investment. About $1.5 billion will be in highway funding, $242 million for a new bridge repair fund, $277 million for mass transit, $23 million for new electric charging stations, and Rhode Island's airports will receive about $45 million. So very significant investments in infrastructure, which is essential to business, being able to move goods and services to compete in a 21st century economy, and being sure customers can come to Rhode Island as well is critical. And we have for a very long time neglected the kind of infrastructure we should be investing in. This, I think, is exciting because it's bipartisan. It will be transformational. Some of the investments in roads and bridges and transit are going to make such a difference, and in Amtrak and in airports. So this is a long time coming. It's going to be followed by a great jobs plan that really invests in all the things that are impediments to getting back into the workforce: affordable childcare, early childhood education, paid family leave, a number of other things that are really critical to working families, and I think are going to be really good for the economy, great for Rhode Island, and have been a big priority of the Democrats and of the president.
It sounds like there's a lot of great potential there. You mentioned the 21st century economy, and I know you've kind of led the charge in Congress against some of the larger tech giants, which, from my, own personal use as a small business owner, we've come to kind of dependent on to spread the word, my marketing skills, all those things that Facebook and all the other, giants have become. Facebook's probably the biggest name in this realm, known for being there and useful tool, but also a problematic tool. Where things stand, and how are you progressing with that legislation?
So in the last Congress, I led an investigation. It was a bipartisan investigation in the large technology platforms. We studied this marketplace for 16 months. We found that these large technology platforms have monopoly power, that they use that power to favor their own goods and services, to disadvantage competitors, to exclude rivals or acquire them. It ends up in real harm to innovation. It hurts small businesses. It hurts workers. A significant decline in entrepreneurship as a result. And we generated a 450-page report with a set of very specific recommendations. In this Congress, we began crafting legislation to restore competition back to the digital marketplace. We passed our first suite of bills in a bipartisan way out of the House Judiciary Committee, and we'll bring them to the floor this fall. But the reality is we want these platforms to work. We want them to work for folks and for small businesses. But the only way they'll work is if there's real competition, and if they're not allowed to steal content or product designs from people who use their platforms to favor their own products and services when they roll out a private label product to compete with people that are in their marketplace. They are useful, but we want to be sure they're not engaging in anti-competitive behavior that's really crushing small businesses. Some of the most disturbing stories we heard were from small businesses who had products stolen, designs stolen, who were excluded, who the platforms favored their own products and services and put them at a disadvantage or put them out of business when they were competitors. So, competition is good. It produces more innovation, more choice, better quality. And we need to ensure that competition exists in the digital marketplace. And right now it really doesn't. And so it's going to be good for small businesses to make space for the next great technology platforms and to have more competition. So it's a unusual coalition. There's not a lot of things that are bipartisan in Washington right now. This is a fully bipartisan effort. My ranking member is Ken Buck from Colorado, a very conservative Republican, but he came to the same conclusion I did. And the committee's worked really hard to keep this bipartisan. The Senate's about to introduce bills that will do the same thing. And I think we're going to see real changes here that are going to benefit small businesses and workers in innovation and competition.
Well, we'll really keep a close eye on that. That sounds excellent. I got a couple more questions here, but I want to point out, ironically, if you're watching this on Facebook, if you have any questions for the Congressman, please put them in the Facebook chat and we'll get to them in just a minute. So 2 other questions here before we get to those. We had a member yesterday asking about the moratorium on evictions. And he represents a small business, a landlord who, is a small business owner. He applied for the stipend from Rhode Island Housing, but the tenant in his property refuses to fill out the application, and therefore he can't get any of the grant money. But he still has to pay his mortgage. Things like that. Is that strictly at the state level? Or is that something that can be affected at the federal level?
Well, I mean, we can make changes to the programs if we need to, but Rhode Island Housing is administering the rental assistance program, the ERA, the emergency rental assistance. As you know, the moratorium of eviction has been extended until October 3rd. The program makes funding available to assist households that are unable to pay rent or utilities. There are two separate programs, and both landlords and tenants are eligible. Just to give you an idea, there have been 8,266 applications that have been submitted for assistance. About 1,522 have been approved. The total amount that's been approved is a little over $10 million. There's $43 million that was requested in total. So there's a number of applications that are still being reviewed. The average assistance has been a little over $6,700. This is again being administered by Rhode Island Housing. They've set up a website, Rent Relief RI, and people should go to it. Landlords and tenants are eligible, and it can pay for rent, and it covers up to 3 months of rent. May also include utilities, as I said. And if people are having difficulty either because a tenant isn't applying, you can apply as the landlord. You don't have to wait for the tenant. But call Rhode Island Housing or go to that website and get this relief. The money is there. Over $200 million came to Rhode Island for this program, because we don't want people to be evicted in the middle of a public health pandemic with a highly contagious virus. On the other hand, we want to make sure small business owners that sometimes own 2 or 3 rental properties or maybe live in 1 floor and rent out 2 floors, they have a mortgage to pay. So we specifically provided help for them as well. And Rent Relief Rhode Island is the website, and Rhode Island Housing is the agency that is administering this. There's lots of resources there. Reach out for help. And Annie is making sure that I say, you also reminder, if you're having problems, a specific issue, either getting in touch with Rhode Island Housing or understanding whether you're eligible, again, call my office, 729-5600. We are happy to help.
Thank you. All right. You've been a great voice in Congress for equity, diversity, and the LGBTQ plus community. Any legislation or programs coming that would affect small businesses for those members?
Well, we passed out of the House my bill, the Equality Act, which prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in housing, employment, public accommodations, jury service, federal funding, and education. It's a fully comprehensive civil rights bill that will protect our community from discrimination once and for all. The Equality Act, which is H.R. 5, is in the Senate awaiting action. That will be a significant improvement in terms of ensuring that everyone in this country can live a life free from discrimination of any kind. It is still the case that the LGBTQ community is the only community in America that in a majority of states, it's still legal to discriminate against. That's wrong. It's un-American. It's inconsistent with our founding principles of equality. And I'm hopeful the Senate will take up the Equality Act and make it the law of the land once and for all. President Biden is anxious to have it on his desk to sign.
Well, here's hoping that happens. That certainly does sound like it's a needed legislation. And then the last question I have before we go to Facebook is a question about activity downtown and how quiet it is, and the fact that the federal courts are still using WebEx and meeting virtually for existing open cases. Is there a way to get back to in-person cases so that there are more people downtown and we are seeing more influx?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, the decision with respect to the operation of the courts are made by the court itself. As you can imagine, there's kind of careful separation of powers between the judicial branch and the legislative branch. But I'm happy to be sure that the folks who are contemplating those decisions think about the implications of, the impact it has on the local business community. Obviously, their first responsibility is safety and public health. But it's a good point, and I'll be sure that I communicate that.
Great. So do we have any questions on the Facebook chat that we can ask the Congressman? All right. We've got one here from Jan. Jan owns a clothing store in North Providence. She asks, please make processing of the idle increases a priority. Small businesses need these funds ASAP.
I agree. This is a big priority for me because this is often the smallest businesses in our state that often don't have any other places to go because their needs are modest, but they often don't have a long credit history. They don't necessarily have a long banking history. So we sent a joined a letter to the SBA administrator to really insist that these idle loans be processed quickly and to make the case of how critical they were to our local businesses. So I will stay on that, of course.
Thank you, Congressman. Any others from the Facebook chat? No, it looks like that's it for now. You can always watch this after the fact and listen to this interview and leave comments there. And I'm sure the congressman's office will be monitoring that, or we can get them over to their office if there are things from people ask after the fact. Again, he gave his phone number, and Annie Peace's email is in there in the chat. So please reach out. There's the phone number on the screen. Anything else you'd like to say in closing, Congressman?
No, just thank you for having me. And again, thank you to all the small businesses that have been part of this coalition. Please do not hesitate to reach out to my office if you need help in any problems you're having with any federal agency, with any of these programs, or just not sure where to look for help. That's why we're there. We may not always be able to connect you to the help that you need, but we'll at least know whether any is available, and it helps inform what we need to be thinking about in the next relief package. So I work for you. Please consider my office a resource there to serve you, and call us if you need assistance with any of these matters, or just have a question. We'll do our best to make sure we get you the answer.
Well, that is great to hear. Thank you again very much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you for helping small business as much as you can.
My pleasure.
And that's another episode. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Representative Cicilline. Again, if you want to know more about the Rhode Island Small Business Coalition, it's rismallbusiness.org. And we are also the Rhode Island Small Business Coalition on Facebook and Instagram. There's the website right there on the screen. Please tune in again in another 2 weeks. I've got Mayor Policino of Johnston. We've got Senator Whitehouse coming up after that, and Mayor Hopkins of Cranston. Plus Speaker of the House Joe Shikarchi is coming up in a couple months as well. So if you have questions for any of these folks, please send them along into the Rhode Island Small Business Coalition. We'd love to ask your questions, or of course, watch it live on Facebook and ask your questions live here. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks.